Yeah, I think the problem was that uh, Hillary's info was cached in the Chrome, so I was logged in the client.
Awesome.
You know?
All right, so we're up. This is good. We can admit people.
Yep.
One moment. Yeah, there's the live stream. Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I'm going to admit your guests.
Thank you so much.
Luke, also make sure that we are spotlighting the right people so that on the live stream we're only seeing speaker view.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Shana Tova, Shana Tova, Shana Tova, Shana Tova, and welcome. Glad you are here. Hello. Oh, folks are still connecting in. Ah, there we go. We have some people here. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. It looks like folks are still connecting in, so we'll give it. Ah, hi, Caroline. Good to see you. Shana Tova.
Hi, Matt. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Shana Tova. That's not Cindy. Cindy, you look very different.
Well, it's been a tough 6 months.
You've changed. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're gonna get started to take advantage of our time together. Hope everybody's Rosh Hashana is off to a meaningful start. Hope that you're finding moments of enjoyment over the course of the holiday. I wish I was in Pilch. This isn't real. This is virtual Pilch. I'm actually in Adelson. I'm across the hall, but it's not a lounge unless I'm in Pilch. So here I am. I'm going to be leading the lounge today and tomorrow with Dr. Rothblum, head of school at Pressman Academy, who I imagine many of you know. I'm very grateful to be doing this together. Another very important guest, of course, is our technician, Lucas. So when you hear me referring to Lucas, who's helping us out with things, that is not me talking to my imaginary friend. That is me talking to Lucas, who's helping us out with spotlighting and slides and so on and so forth. Okay, Lucas, please hop us into some slides so folks can hear what we're going to be talking about over these next couple of days. Okay, there we go. Over the next couple of days, we are going to be talking about building our spiritual strengths. What does that mean? How do we do it? And so on and so forth. These sessions are driven by a book that I've read, and I've been Dr. Rothblum, is encouraging a strong enough word? What's the word you think you would go with in terms of how I've been asking?
Obsessed.
Obsessed. Well, that's a little much. Somewhere between encouraging and obsessed. I think we'll split the difference. Excited by talking about finding ways in the system to work with concepts from this book. It probably won't show up because it's white, and you can't see it at all. Oh, no, if I hold it.
Here, I've got it.
Oh, Dr. Rothblum.
There you go.
Great. The Spiritual Child. The Spiritual Child is a book written by Dr. Lisa Miller. She's a research psychologist, and she's done research into what spirituality is, how it impacts kids, how it impacts parents, how parents can better enhance spiritual experiences for their kids. It's really, really, really interesting stuff because it's not just me, a rabbi, telling you, hey, spirituality is great, and it's not just Dr. Rothblum, an educator, saying, yes, it's important to build loving and healthy environments for your kids because it's an educational value. Dr. Miller is offering it up from really a perspective of research and psychology, and what we're going to be doing over the next, it's going to anchor the programming of these lounges over the course of the high holidays. Today and tomorrow I'll be with Dr. Rothblum, and on Yom Kippur I'll be with Inez Tiger, the Director of Student Wellness at Pressman. We're going to be talking about, yes, in terms of parenting, yes, in terms of kids, but really extrapolating that out because Dr. Miller ends the book with what she calls 7 different spiritual strengths that you can hone to build that muscle of spirituality. and how that can impact you. So Lucas, let's hop over to the next slide, please. Great. So this word spirituality, of course, folks are going to have very different understandings and ideas of what it is. We could probably spend the whole hour today, maybe even the total of the 3 hours we'll have together over the holidays, defining, redefining, exploring, analyzing what we mean by spirituality. In front of you now, this is Dr. Miller's definition, right? This is what she says in terms of how she conceptualizes what spirituality is, and how how it anchors both the experience that folks are having, and the research that she does. So she writes that spirituality is an inner sense of relationship to a higher power that's loving and guiding. The word we give to this higher power might be God, nature, spirit, the universe, the creator, or other words that represent a divine presence. But the important point is that spirituality encompasses our relationship and dialogue with this higher presence. Like I said, we could spend a lot of time breaking this down. Two key components in terms of what she's offering. One is there's God, higher power, something bigger than you, something divine. That's sort of one core element of what spirituality is. And the second is that you're in relationship with it, that you're in dialogue with it, that it exists and you're building that relationship. So that's a very brief summary of what she's talking about when she
Can
says,
I?
yeah.
Can I just chime? One thing I want to chime in, because you said this, but I really want to highlight it because I think different people come at this sentence from different places. And Rabbi Shapiro and I have talked about this a lot, because there are some people who hear this and like are really in tune with it and go like, oh, that's me. I will say that's not necessarily me. What I really appreciate about her approach is that she's actually not coming at this from a religious point of view. She's coming at it from a scientific point of view, and really talks about what the science says about how we're wired, how we see the world, and how we use this as a life skill to navigate the world. And I know we're going to get into in a second, like the benefits or the why, but for those of you who read this and go like, oh, that resonates, like amazing. And for those of you who are like, maybe I logged into the wrong session, like stick with us, because I actually think you'll really appreciate this as well.
And Dr. Rothman just made that promise. So if you don't, you can email her after that. Okay, so Dr. Rothman referenced the next slide. So we'll just hop over to that now. If we can, please, Lucas. Right, so Dr. Rothman mentioned how in the research, Dr. Miller doesn't just say, hey, spirituality is groovy, you should check it out, right? She actually lists out, and I summarized it very briefly here. The sentence before is in the previous slide is directly lifted from the book. I sort of cobbled together from different pages in the book these three statements, but each of these three things are science-based, right? If you want to get into a seminar of this and we can read the whole book together, obviously you're getting the feeling that I would love that. I'm happy to do that, so we're not going to get into all the science of it right now. But just to highlight that it's not just a feeling or an experience, it's something that's actually biologically based in terms of how we can access spiritual experience. And that when we do, and when we enhance that it helps with resiliency, healing, meaning, purpose, optimism, that when we really access that, it's not just, oh, that's something that's innate, and it's great to access it. It's that it's innate, and when we access it, it really enhances our lives. That is sort of the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the day. Let's hold there for 1 second, Lucas. We can exit out of the slides for a sec, and just before we go any further. You can either raise your hand and Lucas will scroll through and see if you're waving, or you can do the digital raise hand function. If you want, I'll just say, if you want to share, you'll need to agree to unmute yourself. I'm sorry about that. It's just how the technology is functioning. But thoughts, reflections, anything folks want to say in response to sort of the core pieces that we've offered to this point. Yeah, Larry.
Well, I just said this, I was fascinated by the last slide that talked about the scientific, the innateness of this, because when you think about every culture in every corner of the world, no matter where they are and throughout perhaps all of history, there's been this, they've got some kind of religion or spirituality built into the culture, and that can't be coincidental.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously there's a whole field like sociology of religion in terms of how that works and how that emerges. And she's going, it's not just something that evolves like because it's something that happens when people get together. This is where even my understanding of the book, even though I've read through it a good amount, I can't explain the science piece off the top of my head, but if you dive into it, she lays out very clearly the biochemistry and all that stuff, really how this functions. It's really fascinating stuff. Yeah, agreed. Other thoughts that are surfacing for folks before we hop forward? Yeah, Yala? What do you think, Doctor? Yala? Great. So Lucas, let's hop ahead once. I think it's slide 5. When you see me looking up, it's because there's a TV in Allison. I'm not trying to give you an eye at my nose, but it's a slightly bigger picture of it. You can see your smiling faces more easily. Hop ahead 2 slides, please. 2. Great, thank you. So, like I said, the very, very end of the book, so this is your spoiler alert, at the very end of the book, Dr. Miller lays out 7 different spiritual strengths. This is also, from my perspective, a nice element of the book is that it's not just conceptual. Like over the course of the book, she actually lays out different practices you can engage in to develop the kind of spirituality that she's talking about, which is really nice that it's not just conceptual, it's not just research, there's some narrative pieces, but there's also some like practical components, right? That it's not something just intellectual, that it's something you can actually implement. And so at the very end of the book, she lays out these 7 different spiritual strengths. One of them, we're going to focus on sort of a different one over the course of these lounges. And one of them is using spiritual language, which she says sets the tone for spiritual perception. That if when I'm out looking at the world and I see what's happening and I see what's happening in my life and I see what's happening around me, if I use spiritual language, if I articulate it through a spiritual lens, through seeing a power bigger than me, through being in a relationship with that power bigger than me, and that impacts how I talk about the world, then it's going to hone my own internal spirituality, right? I can say, oh, look, it's sunny outside. Or I can say, oh, wow, it's a beautiful day. I'm really feeling connected to nature, something bigger than me, a sense of appreciation for this moment right now, right? If I deepen my like linguistic sense of what's happening, it's actually going to help grow that internal spirituality, right? Just a really interesting idea. Lucas, hop ahead 1 more slide, please. For if you just were listening to my sermon, I don't know if folks did. I don't know how this is working for people. The live stream. Yeah, Cindy and Larry, cool. You're some of the only folks I can see, but I'm glad I got the thumbs up from you.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Can I just finish? Can I have 3 more sentences?
Sure.
Oh, great, thank you. So, if you heard my sermon, I'm talking about wonder, right? If you didn't get the memo, that's what the sermon was about. If you didn't hear it, it'll be on YouTube and the podcast and all of the media things we've got going soon. So I talk about wonder. This slide up here, this was a deleted scene from the sermon. It didn't quite make it in the final edit. This is one of the last things cut. Another quote from Heschel, who I also didn't write. Wonder is a state of mind in which we do not look at reality through the lattice work of memorized knowledge, in which nothing is taken for granted, right? So again, like looking at the blue sky, I can say, oh yeah, it's sunny outside, cool. Or I can say, wow, the sun is shining. I'm experiencing warmth. The blue of the sky is beautiful. I feel really grateful for this, right? Like if I take a moment to step outside sort of the routinized experience that I have going about my day, that's something that can hone my sense of spirituality, which Dr. Miller talks about. Yes, Michal.
I guess I have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea of spirituality. I I really feel like I push back with that it's kind of like a construct to like give you comfort or to guide you in like moments maybe like where you're having more challenges, but or maybe to enhance happiness or I'm trying to understand like I feel I don't know, I'm such a pragmatic person. I feel like it's just I have a hard time connecting to it, I guess. I don't know how to so I don't know if it's a question or just
Yeah, you're in
initial thoughts.
the Dr. Rothblum school of thought.
Well, I think
Well, I know exactly what she's talking about, though, frankly, because, you know, if some people seem to be naturally more spiritual than others, meaning that it comes to them easier, or they walk through life maybe a little bit more with that kind of a way of being. And then I think others of us, we have to consciously try to move there almost, or find ways to, maybe that's what you're talking about, find ways to pull that into our world and our day-to-day existence, which tends to be extremely not unspiritual. I mean, it's not really that, but it's just not necessarily always, maybe, as you said, focusing on the wonder, or focusing, stopping to look and think and take in, in a more appreciative way or something like that. I don't know, because we're rushing through everything we do.
I agree with everything that you just said. I also think, I don't know, Michal, this was sort of an aha moment for me last year, because as we were starting to discuss some of these concepts, and I don't know, so there are a lot of connotations that go with the word spiritual. And I was, thinking about, like, I call them the forced dancers of Sfat. Like if you go and you spend a Shabbat in Sfat and, like some Shabbat psalm comes and they all start like dancing with glee, like that's not me. And there are certain connotations that go with that sense of spiritual. And so also some of it is reframing what spiritual really means, and thinking about like practicing gratitude, or noticing the things that we're truly, like the blessings we do have in our life, even when there's a pandemic. That's actually a spiritual moment. Or thinking about bringing purpose and meaning into our world. That's actually a spiritual moment. And so like for those of us who consider ourselves like maybe more pragmatic or more, I think that there's actually things we do in our everyday lives that we don't put in the category of spiritual, but the more that we pay attention to them, and that, like going back to what you were saying, Caroline, the more that we pay attention to them, I think it draws out some of the benefits that spirituality has. It doesn't necessarily have to be in relationship to religion or God or prayer. It can also be like, oh my gosh, yesterday was my kid's birthday and look how joyful she was. So I'd also offer that, if that's helpful at all. Karen, I see Karen wanted to say something.
Oh, can I say two things before? I'm going to say two things before Karen.
She says no.
Karen, I'm saying two things before you say something. One is, yes, in terms of the spirituality and religion piece, right? Some of you have probably heard me say this before. I think of those as like a Venn diagram, right? There's spirituality and there's religion. And for me, the sweet spot is where they overlap, right? That I can access spirituality through religion, that spirituality is sort of that inner relationship that I feel, and religion is an expression of that in some kind of way. And yeah, I think you can be spiritual without being religious. That's a big thing these days. I also think you can be religious without being spiritual, right? I think both of those things are true. For me, that's a meaningful overlap, and it's not for everybody, right? And that's okay. But that's kind of how I see it. So I'm saying that, Michal, to you in terms of that sense of that sense of like spiritual. So I encourage you to like explore when you hear that word, right? When you hear that word, what are the connotations for you and what's there? And is there another way potentially of reframing that a bit? And Caroline, to your point, Dr. Rothblum, not a fan of forced dancing. I literally planned a program and she was like, oh, that sounds so cool. And I was like, yeah, there's going to be dancing. She was like, nope. And she didn't come. So it's totally true. to your point in terms of how, some folks seem to have it in an easier way than others, just like any muscle, right? There might be some people who are like naturally stronger than others in certain ways, but everybody needs to exercise to get strong, right? And even rabbis don't feel spiritual all the time. Oh my God, right? Like everyone has to work at it, right? I think it's something that we all have to work on to feel connected, a sense of meaning, of purpose, gratitude. Not always easy these days, and so then like the inverse of it, like that much more important for us to be finding ways to sort of build these muscles. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Karen, you're up.
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, okay, now I don't even know if it's on point anymore, but
Great.
All these Zooms, I cannot tell you the impact it's had on my spirituality, gratitude, thinking about God, thanking the trees, something like that. And to make myself do that kind of, I'm saying a psalm for someone in the synagogue who's not well. And so I've now found a place that I could be appreciative of on my porch at night with all the lights from the houses and the trees and feeling a different kind of way than I usually do. So it is work, but I think it's saying in the moment, wow, that really looks beautiful. Thank you, God.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is you're a doctor, Caroline. Every minute you're in spirituality. That's according to me. I mean, you're working with people, keeping them healthy, and you may not take the second, you probably don't, you know what I mean, to realize that. But as you were talking, I'm thinking you're involved in spiritual work all the time.
Well,
And
I mean,
that's
I
it.
appreciate that. And you're right. It's just that sometimes I think what Michal was talking about is you're so busy. You're just doing so much. You're moving through the day,
Exactly.
and you almost never take a breath. And so it doesn't feel very spiritual, and it doesn't feel restful or rejuvenating or any of those things that spirituality is supposed to do for you. So I think that's kind of the thing. How do you bring that in to what you're doing? You're absolutely right. I mean, you can have amazing one-on-one interactions with individuals, whether it's as a physician or anybody else, but if you don't reflect on it, take time to reflect on it, then it's kind of lost. Like it doesn't necessarily do all the good for you.
Or I don't connect them. I don't connect them. Like if I try to be great. Like my whole mantra through this whole thing has been literally from day one, silver linings. Everything's going to suck. It's going to be terrible, but there are going to be silver linings, right? So when they pop up, I'm like, silver lining. Like my kids already know, but I don't connect that to being spiritual. I just connect it to be like, you got to find something to get yourself through the day. And I don't know.
I also think about carrying inside me or in my head a little person who taps me on the shoulder and says, look at that tree.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I mean, in my therapy work, I also talk about having a little Mr. Peanut inside you that, taps you on the shoulder. But in some way, if you have some kind of, no, I'll do I statements. If I have some kind of reminder that I can carry with me to stop and notice for a second, that's good enough.
Right.
That's
Caroline, I want to say two things, and then I'm going to push us forward. I'm so glad folks are connecting to this, and I want to make sure we have a little bit more time to get through a few more things. I want to say just very quick. Michal, did you thumbs up or thumbs down? Michal, did you hear the sermon? Thumbs down? No, you did. I knew you didn't because you said the silver linings thing, and in my sermon I say I'm tired of hearing about silver linings, right? So it was not. it wasn't a test. But
I outed myself.
Right,
that one.
Gotcha. Haha. But part of what I talk about in the sermon is saying, I'm tired of talking about silver linings, because for me, silver linings implies cloudy, right? That I can only see good out of that, right? And how do I transcend that? And Caroline, going back to what you're saying in terms of, and Karen, I think you gave a really nice sort of explication of this in terms of how you're working with the experience as it is to find a way to access that, right? And that you don't experience all the time. And Caroline, to your point of, I get so caught up in the day-to-day, and that's exactly the point, right? Like that's exactly the point, is pushing ourselves to say, yeah, I do. I mean, I do as well. Like, life is really, really hectic and busy right now. Yes, right? And pushing ourselves to hit pause. I mean, also, like, if this doesn't work for you, totally fine, right? Like, it might not ping for you, and that's totally okay too. And you can talk to Dr. Miller about the scientific benefits. Okay, so let's.
Wait, Rabbi Shapiro, Norm has had his hand up.
Oh, Norm, I didn't see you. I'm sorry. Norm, go ahead.
I just thought that when Caroline spoke about how sometimes she has a very good conversation with somebody, that it reminded me that, as I understand it, Buber says that that's where God is in those I, thou, or ich, du relationships, where you connect even briefly with somebody on a significant or deep level and experience each other as human beings.
Yep. Absolutely. Norm, you're going to get me on a whole Buber kick now, but yes, absolutely. It's a core component of Martin Buber's thought. Buber talked about how the I-thou relationship is ultimately where God is found, that we have different ways of interacting with the world. And when we access something deep in an interaction, and interestingly, Buber is ultimately, like I said, I'm going to get on a whole Buber tangent now, but Buber's thought is often connected to interpersonal relationships, but he actually talks about how we can have an I-thou relationship with anything, right? The whole beginning of his book is about an I-thou experience of a tree, right? But this again is going back to the whole point of accessing a sense of the divine through a relational construct, even if that relationship isn't necessarily with another person, and certainly through a relationship with another person. Yeah. Okay. I see somebody just chatted me, but I'm trying not to look at the chats. Okay, I'm gonna scoot just forward. Okay, Lucas, can we see the next slide, please? So I'm just gonna, there's always the challenge. There's so much stuff I want to share with you guys, and there's never enough time. Dr. Rothman, what do you think we should do next?
I think go through this. Can you do this quickly? Or if not, let's go through it. Let's not do it.
I'll go through it rabbinically quickly, and we'll see what that looks like.
Okay.
Two different models, right? So in our tradition, we also, right, you can view our literature through the lens of a compilation of different spiritual experiences, right? You can see different elements of Torah, Tanakh, rabbinic literature as logging, hey, here was a spiritual experience for the people here, and here was a spiritual experience for this guy here, right? If you bring that lens to looking at their literature, you can certainly see it there. So two very different ones. One is, right, what's this? It's Har Sinai, right? It's the revelation at Sinai. Collective cacophonous, I was having fun with alliteration, collective cacophonous spiritual experience, smoke, the mountain is trembling, even though they weren't in Southern California, blare of the horn, right? Like this whole, God is speaking in thunder, right? This is how Torah is given, crashing, shaking, right? All of this noise, all of these lights, all of this stuff. And we're told that, yeah, through that, you can experience spirituality. And Lucas, let's hop over to the next slide. Same place, right? Both of these took place at Horeb, right? And this is where Elijah had fled. He was being persecuted. He was being hunted. And he's in the same place where the Torah was given, where it was this very loud, crashing, banging spiritual experience. And it's almost completely inverted, right? That There was a great wind, and it says very specifically, God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. I don't even want to keep harping on this too much. What is going on, everybody? Can we just like 10 seconds? What is happening right now? There's a lot going on. Okay, after the wind, an earthquake. There was a big earthquake. God was not in the earthquake at 11:37 at night. After the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, kol dmama daka, the still small voice, right? Being told very clearly, God wasn't in any of the things that it seemed like God was in at Har Sinai. Exactly that was, instead of collective, the individual. Instead of the crashing and banging, the still small voice. And for me, that's very clearly intentional in terms of how these experiences are tied geographically, right? They're in the same place, but almost a diametrically opposed spiritual experience. Yeah. All right, Lucas, let's hop out of share screen and see what folks have to say, because that was a lot of stuff. You can even unspotlight us because I want to be able to see everybody because I missed Norm earlier. Or you could just spotlight Dr. Rothman. Hello, Dr. Rothman. Can you unspotlight her as well?
Yeah,
I want to.
Go ahead, Cindy. Yes, please.
I just wanted to out myself as the person, not just, but I was the one who chatted you. I didn't know we weren't supposed to be chatting.
No, it's fine. I mean, we're all fit. I saw it pop up Cindy and Larry. I was like, oh, Cindy wants to say something.
It's Chavez and we're on Zoom. It's all very confusing.
I know.
What I was going to say, and this is probably directed to Dr. Rothblum, but it's not just for the Pressman Academy, but also for, I would say, the JLC and how we approach the kids. What?
Matt is JLC.
Oh, and that there's this, I think there are many kids that as soon as the spirituality becomes very connected to kind of some understanding with God, like what spirituality means is connection to God versus what spirituality means is resting and breathing and finding the space to really experience something. And I think that kids tend to turn off the kind of the definition that feels like the former, and it actually stunts them for many years to come in terms of opening up what spirituality can be. And then they have to rebuild it at some point in their adult life, whether that's in their 20s or in their 50s, I'm not sure. But I just want that to be just kind of something that we think about when we're thinking about the kids across the board.
I think it's a great point, right? I think it in some ways speaks to like my experience of what I, even as an adult, defined as spiritual. And, like, I don't want to dance with those people, or that's like in my family, we called it like, I grew up in Boston. So it was like California granola crunchy. Like, that's not us. Like and it had this connotation to it. The thing that, I do see happening at Pressman, which like this may or may not support what you're sharing, because the kids are doing counsel from kindergarten on, because they're doing meditation and yoga, even in the ECC, I think that they do get a broader sense of like how to connect to the universe. I will laugh though, because I think that there are still, I think that we need to do even more to broaden the definition, right? Like, I have a child that will be like, today's the worst day. I have, I have this class and counsel. I was like, you have to like talk about your feelings. Ooh, bad, So like, I think that we just have to continue broadening the definition, because once I understood that even just thinking at the end, like, I have another child who tends to see the glass half empty. And so when they were younger, like 3, 4, we started every single day doing rose and thorn. And Rabbi Shapiro taught me the other day, rosebud. Yeah. Because like I had a child who would come home and tell me everything that went wrong. And I was like, okay, we need to start focusing on what went right. And so just the more that we can broaden that definition for everyone, then I think that we're more willing to like live in that space. And again, going back to like the why, it's not just a good idea. It's actually a necessary practice for resilience for optimism, for grit, for all of those important skills that feel even more important right now.
Yeah. And I would say, sort of in addition to that, I would add one of the things that Dr. Miller talks about is how when the adults in a kid's life are working on their own spirituality, that it actually enhances, right, the possibility of spirituality for those kids, right? Sort of very similar to like Jewish content, right? A kid could learn a lot of great Jewish content at the JLC or at Pressman, and one of the ways that that really takes hold is when it's also practiced at home, right? That there's an integration between home life and the education that kids are receiving. So too here, right? Exactly parallel to that. If a kid is getting tools for spiritual connection, and I think it's great to offer that up very broadly, like, yeah, counseling, yoga, and all that stuff, right? Those are also ways of accessing something bigger than ourselves, right? Viewing the world through a broader lens, etc. Getting into our bodies and experiencing like how we can, really feel that physically. If that's reinforced at home through the adults in the kid's life working on their own spirituality, that's part of how we create that for the kids. And sort of hopping back out of the parenting context, that's something that ultimately the responsibility lies for each of us, right? That we ultimately, if we want to try to access that's something that we're each, right? The more we work on it, the stronger it is. There are some skeptics in the room, which is fantastic. I love it. And I'd encourage you to like think about, right? And you might be that much more resistant to coming back over the course of the holidays. I'll say you should dafka come back, because we're going to offer you 3 different spiritual strengths to work on, and one of them might even work for you. 4 out of 5 doctors recommend, something like that. Okay, so in terms of you, we're going to try to put this into action. We're gonna just, Lucas, we're just gonna all stay in the room. We're not going to go to the breakout rooms for time's sake. But can we pull up the next slide, please, for folks to see? So one of the things that Dr. Miller talks about, let's hop one more. Great, thank you. So one of the things that Dr. Miller talks about is, again, viewing your language, viewing your experience and sort of filtering it through this lens of spiritual connection. So if you aren't Michal, and you did hear my sermon right before this, you heard me talking about a couple of things that I've experienced and filtering them through that lens, right? Like filtering, like seeing my kids play on the beach on Father's Day, I can say, oh, cool, my kids are playing on the beach on Father's Day. That's great. Or I can say, wow, look at how happy they are. Look at how joyful they are. I'm so glad they're having such a good time. I feel connected to them. I feel connected to nature. I feel connected to something bigger than me. Wow, this is really a moment that's full of wonder for me, right? Like that's an example of how I can say, oh, that is a thing that's happening. Or I can say, huh, look at that. And accessing something bigger than me in terms of how I'm framing that experience for myself. And through that language, connecting to something bigger than me. So I'm going to encourage you guys to do this now. We're going to give it a shot. This is, of course, as we're seeing, a participatory thing. And I think we actually even heard it already a little bit from Karen, right? In terms of telling a story about a time you felt spiritually connected, right, Karen? Thumbs up. Yeah. That you were saying, through these Zooms, I'm learning, I go outside, I look at the lights, I've been saying this psalm, right? I feel a sense of connection, even of gratitude, right? You could just say, yeah, I'm on the computer a lot doing some Zooms and I'm thinking about somebody and saying a psalm for them, right? But going one step deeper into that experience. So I'll invite others to share as well, right? Can you tell a story? This is through the lens of counsel, like Dr. Rothman said, right? That we share stories, right? We use I language. This is something that happens to me. This is what I felt. We tell stories in order to connect to that, and by being present with someone sharing their story, we affirm their sharing, and we were able to witness what their experience is. So I'll invite, right? Someone willing to give it a shot, to tell a story about a time that you felt spiritually connected. Lucas, we can hop back out of the slides and we can see can go to gallery view, we can unspotlight everybody, and we can see, oh, Tali, yes, Bakasha.
Can you hear me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah, my camera's not working, but I thought about this question a lot going into this holiday because it's so different with how we're experiencing kind of our spiritual connection.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the two most spiritual times in my life have been polar opposites. And the first one was I was taking a hike, and about 5 or 6 miles in, I realized I must have taken a wrong turn, and I never really got anywhere. And about 7 miles later, I got back to the start of the hike, never having reached, the point vista of whatever. And it was a kind of interesting thing because many times we think of a journey as having, the end point of something to reach to and something to get to, and we made it.
Yeah.
And there's something really fascinating of about, 4 hours and 7 miles deep of that not occurring, but yet having that total serene feeling of just allowing yourself to continue. And there was something really powerful about kind of just continuing to continue and giving the space to just be with my thoughts and to connect to whatever kind of came through and then came back. And then the next one was last year during Ne'ilah. There's a kind of specific moment.
Please mute yourselves.
I know.
Hello. Please leave a message.
Lucas, can you mute folks who aren't talking, please? Thank you. Oh, is Cindy and Larry? Oh, no.
Okay, there's a specific moment in Ne'ilah where everyone is at that point of self-meditation and self-reflection that for me, when I kind of open my eyes again and look around, there's something so powerful being surrounded by everyone at that moment. And that's something kind of two very different experiences I've been thinking about this year because neither of them are available in the same way.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Two, as you said, very different stories. The sermon I didn't give this year is I was going to talk about collective effervescence. That's a sermon I didn't give, and you just described it through a group of people joining together. You transcend, right, sort of your normal experience and how we're lacking that this year and how can we access that. That was the sermon I didn't give. So you and I can figure out that sermon. Maybe that'll be a draw and you and I can work on it later. But yeah, I hear all of that, and certainly the metaphor of even as you're feeling lost, having some trust, having some faith, and still putting one foot in front of the other. The metaphor writes itself from there, right? In terms of the situation that we're in right now, and how do we cultivate that trust, and how do we cultivate that faith, and keep doing it, right? I mean, waking up every morning and getting out of bed can be an act of spirituality, right? I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other today, and I'm gonna make it work, right? I'm gonna find a way to get through the day, and I'm gonna have a sense that I'm gonna be able to do what I need to do, and that things are gonna be okay, right? Not a given. We don't know, but we can try to access that. Yeah. I think we have time for maybe anybody else want to share tell a story about a time you felt spiritually connected, especially if you're a cynic. Caroline, you're going to give it a shot. Awesome. Yes.
I'm not really a cynic, but
but you're going to give this a shot.
I'm just spiritually challenged.
That's great.
I think that most of my spiritual experiences relate to nature.
Yeah.
And I have this one vivid memory when I was actually in my last year of medical school, and there's a whole lot of free time at the end of medical school, and I took advantage of it by spending a lot of time skiing in Europe. And I was on my own, And I remember I was heading up to one of my favorite places, which is Argentière, which is in Chamonix, and it's the highest point. And I arrived there in the evening, and I got on the train, switched this very old train, and it was going up this little track all the way up the mountain, and it started snowing. And it was just this, just these huge, delicate snowflakes coming down. And you're surrounded by this unbelievable alpine vista. And I mean, that was, if there was ever a spiritual experience, it was that. It was just so serene, and you were at one with nature, and there was just hearing the train. There was nothing else there but that. And I think that was, I'll never forget that. It was just beautiful, beautiful moment in time, as it, for, all by yourself, you know, just without anyone around, just sort of feeling that.
Beautiful. Dr. Rothman, looks like you want to share something.
I'll share one, which I think is perhaps in the more mundane. You know, again, I want to try to make this share for those who are still skeptics. Thursday was my youngest's birthday. She turned 4. And we had a lot of conversations about her birthday, what she wanted, you know, given that there wasn't going to be a birthday party. And she shared, like, back in May, June, maybe, that all she really wanted was a water slide. And yesterday there was no school. Thursday was her birthday. It was like just sort of a perfect day. So we rented a water slide. And so Magic Jump Rentals came to, you know, deliver the inflatable bouncy at 8 a.m. And watching her face as this frozen bounce house slide got inflated in my yard, right? Like, her eyes were wide. She had been talking about this for months. Like, it was this really, she found such joy and wonder in this very, like, the inflatable bounce house becoming big. And it really was this moment of connecting to something bigger than myself, like watching her joy and wonder created this really, I would say, spiritual experience with the 2 delivery guys from Magic Jump Rentals.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like for her and for you.
Right.
And
sure.
she might not have the language for it in the same kind of way, but for her and for you, right? And Miller talks about that in the book, that there are sort of 2 stages when spirituality is most, there's sort of like moments of burst, right? When you can really access that. And one is when kids are young, right? Around like 2, 3, 4, and there's sort of this innate sense that is really flowering. And one, interestingly, is at the beginning of adolescence, right? Which is a different conversation, and very interesting conversation. It's a very different moment. But certainly, yeah, for her to have that experience and for you to experience that in turn as the parent, yeah, that's really, really lovely. We have a couple more minutes. I see, Norm, you have your hand raised, so Norm will share, and then I think we'll wrap.
Yeah, I would share that the most spiritual moment I can think back on was the bris of my first son, because it was a time that I was very much aware of the significance and the presence of people who wouldn't be there through his whole life. Some who were really already gone, like my grandmother, for whom we named him, but also some who were there. His son, the Sondek, was a cousin of mine once removed, who was a survivor whose own children had been killed in the war. And the whole scene was very overwhelming to me. We had written out what we wanted to say about our hopes for the baby and the people he was named after, and the entire thing was very overwhelming to me. And I look back on it very closely for a long time after that. And I think that was probably one of the highest spiritual moments in my life.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Norm. The sense of generations, right? Family, community, love, right? Sort of all sharing that experience together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It actually is sort of like, I'll convert that into a sneak peek for tomorrow, because one of the things that we're talking about tomorrow is talking about tending the field of love. And I won't even start unpacking that term. I'll just sort of leave it there as a coming attraction, but it's very closely connected on to what you're talking about in terms of building those relationships, building that love, and how that can enhance spiritual connection, right? And what that can do for everyone who's a part of it. So thanks for sharing that. Lucas, let's quickly hop into the slides to wrap up. There's something about telling these stories that in turn, thank you, that in turn helps us move forward. So there's this phrase from the Zohar that says, the Torah is the blueprint of creation, right? That the language that we have, the words that we have of our tradition are actually what creates the world. And so I'll tie that into what we're doing as well. When we use this language, when we use this spiritual language, we create something about how we're living our lives, right? So that's the invitation. Lucas, we can hop to the next slide. My background fluctuates, right? So what I'll encourage you to do, right? Because we're talking about, Dr. Miller has these practical things, right? It's not just sort of stuff to think about and very out there in the ether. It's actually something practical to do. So what I'll invite you to do over the holiday and moving into this year is to explore how you can find new ways of using spiritual language. Describe your experience for yourself and your relationships with others. And I think we heard a really beautiful spectrum just now of spiritual experiences in parenting, in life cycle events, in nature, right? We're hearing a really nice broad spectrum of where we can experience that sense of spiritual connection, to be in dialogue with something bigger than us. And I'll encourage you guys to play with that a little bit. Thank you everybody for coming. There's a lot more we can talk about. I'm happy to continue any and all of these conversations. I don't want to speak for Dr. Rothblum, but I'm confident she is as well. Thumbs up, fantastic. And if you want to join us, we'll be doing this again tomorrow morning, different time. So tomorrow morning we'll be gathering at 9:30 to explore this topic some more, to examine another spiritual strength. And whether we see you then or not, just wishing you all Shana Tova and stay healthy, and hope you have a meaningful and joyous holiday. And thanks for joining us this morning.
Shana Tova.
Thank you, Dr. Rothblum, for leading this with me. I really appreciate it. It's great sharing this time with you. Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.